Hello, everyone. Welcome back. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I'd like to introduce this afternoon's panel, A History of Colonialism, the Doctrine of Discovery and its Impact on Native Peoples. I will introduce our moderator, Reverend Carmen Rosario. She is born and raised in Puerto Rico. She holds a bachelor's in education and history and a master's in education and history from the University of Puerto Rico. In 1984, she obtained her MDiv from McCormick Theological Seminary, and she has served as pastor in presbyteries from Chicago, Monmouth, and since 2006, New York City. She will be leading our panel discussion this morning, and I will turn it over to you. Thank you.
Okay. Well, good morning. As she said, I'm Carmen Rosario, and even though I live in the land of the Lenape people in New Jersey, I come from the island of Boriquen, the great land of the valiant and noble lord, or the land of the great lords, Puerto Rico, where the Taino people inhabited this island as well as other Caribbean islands centuries before Christopher Columbus on his second voyage to these lands encountered the island that the Taino called Boriquen on November 19, 1493, and took possession of it for Spain, beginning with this action a process of colonization that lasted 405 years under Spanish rule, and in 1898, and have continued to this day as the United States invaded Puerto Rico in 1898 during the Spanish-American-Cuban War, possession of the island as a booty of war. At the present time, Puerto Rico is subject to the most blatant expression of colonialism of the 21st century. For centuries, we Puerto Ricans thought that the Taínos were completely exterminated, that they left only some food and cultural traditions. Today, the DNA tests have shown that most of the population of Puerto Rico have Taino in their blood. My latest test reveals that I am 7% Taino. Puerto Rico, as well as the Hispaniola and Cuba, serve as the base from where other explorers would live to encounter, invade, and colonize territories all over what we know as South, Central, and North America. Ponce de Leon, the first Spanish governor in Puerto Rico, left from Puerto Rico in 1513 in search of new lands and the so-called Fountain of Youth, and landed on what today is Cape Canaveral and named it Florida because it was during Easter, and took possession of it for Spain, beginning with his action a process of Spanish conquest and dominion over the native people of the South and Southwest region of what today is the United States. Spanish is the oldest non-Native American language spoken on the USA. It was not until 1607 that the English arrived in Virginia and in 1620 in Plymouth, beginning the process of the Anglo conquest and colonization. I'm going to ask Lori to show us a map of the lands of the native people and where our churches are. Lori?
Just a second.
These are the lands of the of this our synod with the representation of the different native lands. We have 4 churches, Native American congregations, and we want to recognize them. The Brook Presbyterian Church that was recently acknowledged as one of our Native American congregations, and we congratulate and we are happy to have them with that distinction. So my question is, what right does this nation have to take, conquer, and dominate all these lands? We find the answer in the doctrine of discovery. What is? How has the doctrine impacted and still impact our society And in fact, our church, this panel will attempt to address some of these issues. So now it's my honor to introduce Anthony Trujillo, who will explain what is the doctrine of discovery. And he will tell us a little bit about his story, and will give us information about what is the doctrine of discovery. Anthony.
Here we go. So I'm going to do a quick overview of the doctrine of discovery, and what we might, it's kind of fitting that this comes on the heels of the earlier discussion on improvisation, because what I would, maybe one way to think about the doctrine of discovery is colonial and imperial improvisation for the acquisition of native lands and the expropriation of native resources that is ongoing today, as Carmen just mentioned. Thank you so much for that introduction. So the first thing I want to show, because we just have a very brief period of time, I think it might be most helpful to just offer a series of images and some text that go along with what the doctrine of discovery is. In this picture, we have, what many will recognize as just the outline of the United States. It's a map that gets, that seems in many ways just the delineation of states and the country as a whole that seems natural and normal. But what I want to suggest is that this is actually a product of the doctrine of discovery. One of the first questions to ask is, where are Indians, and where is Indian country, so to speak? So often, I think, because of where the majority of native reservations are in the United States, in the western part on the west of the Mississippi, we tend to think of native country or Indian country as over there somewhere, out west, not here in the Northeast. But let's see. This is a map from author Lisa Brooks, the book Common Pot, called The Recovery of Native Space in the Northeast. And this is a map of early routes connecting native communities all across the broad swath of the Northeast. And one of the things that we see that's really different in this map than from the first one I just showed of the United States is this one's based on routes and connective points between different locations, often following rivers and waterways, whereas the one of the United States is based on borders. And I think that's a really important distinction. This is another way of seeing the native Northeast, or a segment of it, as overlapping spaces rather than harshly delineated spaces by borders. And so we have, the Haudenosaunee territories up in the northwest part, Lenape, down in the New York City area, and it's great to be on with Brook Presbyterian and with Holly, who are representing Lenape communities in Shinnecock as well today. So one of the questions is, how do we get to this, sharply delineated map of the United States and the, isolation of native peoples into, small reservations, or even the erasure of native peoples altogether? And one of the ways that this happens is through this map, which is from the early 1500s or late 1400s, basically dividing the world into two segments, based on what Carmen just mentioned. This is the map of the Papal Decree of 1493, or that follows the Papal Decree of 1493, basically giving all of the, or almost all of the Western Hemisphere over to the Spanish for Spanish colonization, with this red line that that goes through Brazil, and the Eastern Hemisphere over to the Portuguese for Portuguese colonization in the 1493, as a result of some of their conflicts as to over who was going to be able to colonize and expropriate land and resources in the Americas and in Africa, I should also say. The Africa went to Portugal according to this papal decree, which the Pope in this decree put it this way: out of our largest and certain knowledge, and out of the fullest of our apostolic power, and by the authority of the Almighty God conferred upon us, blessed by Peter, etc. So the Pope is claiming apostolic authority through Christ, given by God, to draw this map, establishing a line from the Arctic Pole, namely to the north, to the Antarctic Pole. And at the bottom, we see this quote: "In order to make, appoint, and depute you and your heirs and successors over them with full and free power, authority, and jurisdiction over every kind." So this is the Pope trying to mediate this conflict between Spain and Portugal, and dividing the world in half, and giving these two imperial powers rights to use their force, power, and authority to colonize the world, basically. Christopher Columbus kind of took by part of what we see in this is the use of theology to underpin this whole idea. Christopher Columbus took this, or some of these ideas, and in his journals, this translated portion, the way that he understood Native peoples, the Taino here, of the Caribbean and the Caribs, is basically they all go naked as their mothers bore them, and I suppose that they come from the mainland and to capture them for slaves. They should be good servants and very intelligent, for I observed that soon they repeat anything that is said to them, and I believe that they would easily be made Christians, for they appear to me to have no religion. So basically what Columbus is doing here is regarding Native people as blank tablets, naked and ready to be Christianized, and to be brought into Christendom. We see the same type of logic being applied in the Massachusetts Bay Colony with a naked, Indian saying, "Come over and help us." And this recruitment pamphlet from Robert Cushman, he was from the Remarkable Providences, saying, "Now it seems to me that we should also endeavor to use every means to convert them, or they ought to come to us, or they ought to come to us. To us they cannot come, for our land is full, so to them we must go, for their land is empty." So this idea of emptiness and nakedness in North America becomes the premise for colonization and Christianization. The Dutch use this in when Henry Hudson comes into and explores the Hudson River Valley, basically saying, when this country was in 1609 first founded by the Dutch, they learned that the natives had no Christians had been there before. So basically, hey, it's free reign. And now all the Dutch, the English, everybody's trying to get a piece of this, of North America. And they're using basically colonial improvisation on the doctrine of discovery to do that. This map is a map from 1661, and I think really speaks to how native North America and the Northeast, and probably the whole Western Hemisphere, was viewed. In this map, this is a early map of Manhattan, and I guess several of the prominent features on this map are the military bastion down in the Battery in southern Manhattan, the wall that's currently Wall Street, separating colonized European space from native space. What I want to draw attention to in this is, as Carmen pointed out, the fact that on the other side of that wall, there's nothing. It's just empty, vacant land that's open for colonization, even though this is native space, and even though that colonized portion of the lower Manhattan is also native space. So this is a way of wiping native peoples off the map. And the ships here, I think, represent, they're going up into the interior of Native America to expropriate resources out. And this, I'll wrap up with this. This gets instantiated in American law. That's still good law in 1823 in the Johnson v. McIntosh decision, where Justice Marshall at the time is saying why it's okay for America to have conquered, so to speak, and taken possession of all this land. We see that there's these contestations between the Dutch and the English. That at the bottom here, the Cabots, had then come into and did some explorations or invasions along the Northeast to take possession of the lands in the Northeast for England. And it's really important here that the theology gets worked into American federal law. So we find some excuse, if not justification, for why this was legitimate in the character and habits of the people whose rights have been wrested from them. That is the indigenous people, notwithstanding the occupancy of the natives who were heathens. So the whole idea here is that because native people were not Christian, this gave imperial powers the right to take their land, and rather than being owners of the property, native people are regarded as just occupants until they divulge their land and resources to imperial powers, which then gets transferred over to the United States. So that is a quick summary. I probably even went over here of the doctrine of discovery, but I think that sets us up for some of the conversation to come. Thank you.
Okay, let me share a little bit about how the Presbyterian Church has been responding to the doctrine of discovery. There's no doubt that the church, and by this I mean the church as an institution, both the Roman Catholic or Protestant denomination, have played a role in the conquest and exploitation of native people around the world by actively participating in this process or by being silent bystanders. I don't have time here to go in 5 minutes that they gave me for this, to go over the history of the relations of the Presbyterian Church in all its different branches with the native people in our nation. I just want to share some of the recent actions of General Assembly. The 222nd General Assembly in 2016 took an action which directs that, I quote, that the PCUSA and its members apologize to the United States citizens of Native American ancestry, both those within and beyond our denomination. We offer this apology especially for those who were and are part of stolen generation during the Indian assimilation movement, namely former students of Indian boarding schools, their families, and their communities. The 220th General Assembly in 2018, in the document, the Doctrine of Discovery, review of its origins and implication for the coronation in the PCUSA, and support for Native American sovereignty from the Presbyterian Mission Agency, directs the State Declarer of the General Assembly to issue a call for the engagement of mid-council and the congregational members to start a flow of ideas and information back and forth between mid-councils and congregational members, directed at understanding how the doctrine of discovery has been present in our history and our theological positions and continues to be present today. The Assembly also approved the formation of a coordinating council for the purpose of encouraging, monitoring and sharing the ongoing responses by the National Church, Big Council, and congregations to the call to action issued by the state decree. This council was presented to this council was to present recommendations to the 224 General Assembly, and in 2020, the General Assembly approved to extend the mandate to have this Native American Council, and also it calls meet councils with Native American churches and chapels in their bounds, as well as churches with partnership with Native American congregations to review this report and develop process for repair and improvement of church properties. So these are just recent actions of our denomination. Now it's within this spirit that all this action and history, that's why we are today. So we are going to hear from Patricia Osterhaus, Carla Alexander, Susan Black Snake, Reverend Holly Hales Thompson, and Tila Truck. They are going to come to this panel. They are going to be addressing some of these questions. First, how has the doctrine of discovery impacted Native communities? Two, what are some of the things we can do to support the issues that are important to Native communities? Three, what does it mean to build relationships? What does it mean to accompany? And the four, how does the doctrine continue to impact our society? So we are going to ask Patricia to share with us at this point.
Thank you. My name is Pat Osterhout. I'm an elder at Brook Presbyterian Church. I'm head of the Native American ministry here at the church. I'm also a recovery coach for the substance use recovery world. I have my own 501c3 in honor of my son who passed from an opiate overdose in 2019. I'd like to start out by just giving you a little history of Brook Church, and I think some of those questions are addressed in this brief history, and maybe give a little insight on which areas that Brook Church would like to see this conversation head in. So Brook Presbyterian Church in Hillburn, New York is a historical church with a rich Native American history. Starting as a traveling Bible meeting in 1855, hosted by the residents of the Ramapo Mountains, Brook Church has maintained its inclusive ministry. Its first permanent home was a one-room school/church house for colored meaning other than white, residents of the Ramapo Mountains. That building was located at 158 6th Street in Hillburn. Early in the 1890s, a new church was built down the hill at 116 6th Street, where it is now. That church was dedicated to the presbytery in 1893, the same year that another church, Presbyterian Church, named the Ramapo Presbyterian Church, was dedicated in the town of Hillburn. Brook Church is located on 6th Street. That church is still located, no longer a Presbyterian church, but still located at 4th Street in Hillburn. Mind you, the area that's inhabited in Hillburn, this 2.2 square mile town, is only 0.75 miles. So we had two Presbyterian churches in the same town. Through the decades, Brook has maintained its family ties. Names like DeFries, DeGroat, Alexander, Osterhout, and Mann, to name a few, have graced the pews for generations. Traditions like the locally famous Brook Church pre-Thanksgiving dinner and lentil breakfast have served Hillburn and the surrounding communities for over 130 years. The families of Brook, along with a young Thurgood Marshall, led the fight that ultimately, and without fanfare, desegregated the Hillburn schools in 1943. 11 years before Thurgood Marshall's landmark case, the Brown versus the Board of Education. Brook members used Brook Church as a schoolhouse during the boycott of the colored school. Through depression and pandemic, Brook Presbyterian Church has continued to serve the community, guided by God's word and blessing. Brook Church continues to serve as we have, while also addressing the evolving substance use issues that plagues our greater community. We are partnered with a local nonprofit MATS movement and the Village of Hilburn, Mayor Joe Tercey, to educate our community on substance use prevention, support recovery, and eradicating the stigma around addiction. In the past 2 years, we have hosted AA meetings, free CPR classes, and free Narcan trainings. We have extended Narcan classes to all churches in the Hudson River Presbytery. Our mission to serve the elderly and shut-in in the area has continued through the season of COVID. We have crafted 50 Easter baskets to deliver to the elderly and shut-ins in the surrounding communities, regardless of church affiliation. Our Christmas baskets were delivered to 40 members of the community. During the COVID Thanksgiving season, while other churches and venues were canceling Thanksgiving services and events, Brook Church members brainstormed a way to keep our annual pre-Thanksgiving dinner on schedule for the second Friday in November, a tradition that has never canceled in the 130 plus years of its history. After consulting with the Board of Health, and the ideas for a drive-through event was developed, the brainchild of Carla Alexander. The stability of the event was just what our community needed during these times of instability. Our mayor and the trustees of the village town pitched in to deliver school food to some residents in the town. This dinner turnout was one of the most successful events in the recent memory. Just to remind you that this was also an event for the town, so anybody that didn't have the money to purchase a dinner was also given a dinner. And that brought us in over $3,000 for a 3-hour event. Okay, so in this little town. So I just say these things so you can see that Brook, over the years, we've struggled, we've worked with the community, we've done things. We have tried to keep Brook Church strong. When trying to work with the presbytery, I can tell you what hasn't worked for us. What hasn't worked is the presbytery saying, well, Brook Church is okay, let's leave them alone. And that's a quote from somebody from the AC committee that was assigned to our church at one time. And that has been the feeling that we've gotten. As long as we don't talk too loud, we're left alone. So that doesn't mean that there's a relationship. That means there's no relationship. And that is where we've gotten caught in the cycle, especially this past year, trying to get help from the presbytery, that we get caught in the cycle of, let's not say too much. Let's not do too much, because eventually Brook Church is just going to go on their way and stop fighting and be, and we can leave them alone. They're self-sustaining. They're able to do, and they're representing the presbytery in such a great way. We don't have to do anything for them. We'll just leave them alone. That is what cannot be done anymore. When we are reaching out for help, when we're telling you what we need, those are the things that people need to listen to us. We are here because we want a relationship with the presbytery. We're here because of all these issues that we have in our church that we're trying to figure out what can be done. We want somebody to listen, and listen not only with their ears, but with their heart. And that looks like, for Brook Church, people who are committed to being a support team for Brook Church, not just a convenience when there's a problem. The last letter that we received, we had asked for help. We started this journey about a year ago. When we were having some problems in the church, I reached out to the presbytery somewhere around January of this year. We were just getting things, starting to talk about things and work on things. And then the summer came, and, as is right, a lot of people went on vacation. Well, in the middle of the summer, we received a letter saying, since everything is basically okay, we're just going to disband your support committee. It's like, wait a minute, what? Where did I lose that conversation? Where did I miss? And that's because people were listening with their ears, not their hearts. And that is where our disconnect is. Stop sending us to different committees. Just help us. Thank you. And as I don't know what our time looks like for each. I can't hear you, Carmen. You're on mute.
Thank you, Patricia, for this information. We asked that each presenter with 5 minutes to each presenter. So now we're going to hear from Carla Alexander. She's going also to share some information, but please be mindful of the time so that everybody can have the time. At the end, we're going to have time to debate in small groups, and then for people to discuss in small groups. So, Carla.
Yes, my name is Carla Alexander. I'm an elder here at Brook Church. I'm also liaison for the Native American Ministry and Rampo Lenape Nation. I'm going to actually read part of history of the Rampo Lenape Nation from Chief Vincent's words. And it's just I'll just briefly read part of it. It's about our history. Let the wind fall on you and these trusts and wisdoms reach your heart. Retell them and incorporate them into your curriculums. Your history, your experiences of what happened to the First Nations must not continue to be whitewashed. Tell these stories in your truth and entirety. Let the world know that the first people of the rivers, the mountains of this land we now call America are still here, that our greater Mid-Eastern region that includes the Wappinger, the Ephesus, the Tappan, the Hackensack, the Pumpkin, the Mohegans, the Moravian Town, the Muncie, Delaware, and the Mantis, the Mohegans, and the Ramapos, the countless other families of bands of Muncie, we are truly and undoubtedly still here. The century is the 1600s, and our people are having a difficult time in coexisting with the European settlers that now rule over the island of Manhattan, and which of what is our ancestral lands. During this time, the great tension, it was retaliatory strike against one of our villages led by the Dutch out of New Amsterdam that took many of the lives of our people. They struck the village without prejudice, setting fire to our wigwams, decimating our families, and there were their elders, women, and other children. All in approximately 700 were killed. As the flames rose around the wigwams, everyone came running out only to bear witness to the long guns that was the sights of the Dutch and caused our elderly women and children to choose and return into the burning wigwam, accepting the fate that one that would end in their terms and not that those of the reckoning of hell that came upon them. In some of the written field reports, it is noted how eerie it was as they returned to their wigwams, burning wigwams. The sound was made as they perished into the flames. This is the beginning of this story. Days after the attack decimated the village, the men returned to find that everyone had been killed. It wasn't long before revenge was once again taking place. Many treaties of peace were written and spoken, and they were routinely broken as their written words were never upheld as truth because they chose not to create words or strings of wampum from their hearts. It was only greed that and the need for more land that kept colonization machines hard at work. It was this colonization of the lands that pushed our peoples from the lands that had cultivated and sustained villages, hunting grounds, fishing grounds, planting grounds, and harvesting grounds, including these confederation conferences, were also the places of our ancestors who had walked on these lands, and their bones still remain as part of these today. Our people have occupied and protected these sacred lands for over 12,000 years, and there are many written accounts of the ancient tribe of the Ramapos, and through the archaeological work has been documented. Many accredited written accounts of our people exist in many different forms, whether it's through mentioning the canoes of 1923 or the Smithsonian Institute. Approximately 800 of over 1,000 years old belong to the ancient tribe of the Rampo Nation. Today, we are still fighting for our lands through a town, through the county, and through the church, trying to get our ceremonial lands, our tribal lands, and our sacred lands. Without the help of any outsiders, we fight every day. We've fought for federal recognition. We've been, because of political reasons, we have not received our federal recognition. But we don't need to be recognized by someone else. We know who we are. We're still here and we will always be here. And this church stands on our land and was founded as a Native American church for our people. And we will fight for our church and our traditions and our cultures forever. Thank you.
Thank you, Carla, for these words and for the passion and to remind us about this important part of our history. We are asking now that Sarah Black Snake will present us. Sarah and Susan, Susan here.
Susan is here, but is currently muted.
Okay, Susan, please. Susan. Lori, can you find about Susan?
Yes, I'll see if she's having difficulty. Why don't you move on while we sort it out?
Okay, so let's ask Reverend Holly Hale Thompson to share with us. I haven't said a lot about people that are participating because I want to have the time, but at the end, if we have time, I'm going to say a little bit about every person that have participated. Holly.
Okay, I see Suzanne again on this screen. Is she?
She is unmuted now.
Okay, I'm
Hello,
gonna
can
wait
you
because
hear
I
me?
want Tila to follow me.
Yes, we can hear you, Suzanne.
Okay, I can barely hear you. I'll just go ahead and start speaking. I'm not sure of the technology here. I'd like to speak first about the question you asked, the impact of the doctrine of discovery, how I see it in our community, making it personal. And the doctrine of discovery is really such a farce in terms of what it's based on. It's based on untruth. I believe even today it's perpetuated on a feeling that the first and original inhabitants of this continent were savages, that they were subhuman, and therefore had no rights, had no say, similar to owning, I guess, cattle or pets or animals, that they could be taken and their futures decided for them. That concept, I don't think needs too much explaining. I think you could imagine for yourself what your life or your family would be like if another country or a sovereign of some sort came in and imposed that today on your family, that you had no rights all of a sudden, or that you could be removed from your home, that all your values were considered to have no meaning, your religions had no meaning. Doctrine of discovery is very damaging and traumatizing event, and that has been perpetuated for hundreds of years. It's very shameful, and that it could still exist today, and it is challenged, and it seems to be something that's going to be around for a while, even though we challenge it. Doctrine of discovery, as I said, was based on the fallacy that we were not quite human, that we were subhuman, and how that got perpetuated in the United States. It was mentioned earlier through laws, federal law. Many cases are based on that concept. The Department of Interior, the United States Department of Interior, originally was based on the Department of War. The Department of War assumed federal responsibility over the Native American or the Indian problem, as it was referred to. And then that became the Department of Interior, and they created a little component called the Bureau of Indian Affairs. And again, it perpetuates that we are non-compos mentis. That means you're incompetent. When you're incompetent, you have a guardian, such as children or people that have mental health problems and are not capable to make decisions for themselves. Today, there still is the Bureau of Indian Affairs. We have what we call the BIA. Other institutions that the United States has perpetuated this savage theory is our Indian boarding schools. My family was affected by this. As far as I know, my grandparents went to boarding schools. My grandmother attended the Thomas Indian School. On my mother's side, my grandfather attended a school. I can't remember the name of it. It was Hampton. He went to Hampton. And most of his brothers and sisters attended either Thomas Indian School or they went to Carlisle in Pennsylvania. On my father's side, my grandfathers and grandmother went to Quaker school. My father and several of his brothers and sisters attended the Quaker school that was located here on the Allegheny Territory. In these boarding schools, you were given a uniform to wear, so you couldn't wear your traditional clothing or anything that represented your community and your community values. You were forbidden to speak your native language. So my parents were born into Seneca-speaking homes. That's their first language. All their concepts and values were formed in that Seneca language. And then it's forbidden, and they had to learn to speak English. So English was their foreign language. Some losses have occurred with our language, significant losses rather, because of that concept alone. Also, you were not allowed to practice what we call our longhouse religion, which is what the Iroquois in New York State practice. Many still do, very strong religion. And that was forbidden. So you had to attend some type of a Christian instruction and religious classes and follow the religious calendar of the school you attended. One other, besides losing our language, try to imagine the impact on parenting and on family structure, cohesiveness. If, say, these schools started in 1845 and went until the 1950s or 1960s, that's like 100 years that family, the concept of a nuclear family, has been forbidden or disrupted. How can you learn parenting from a matron or from a teacher? There were, there were very few family visits during the school year. My father referred to being able to come home in the summer, and he only lived about 10 miles from his original home, his farm. He could not just come home. He had to stay in the school to be enrolled. So today we have many things in our community that I think represent that disruption of the family and nurturing cycle. We have a lot of child welfare cases. We have some, we have a lot of substance abuse, depression. We have alcoholism. We have so many health problems that are today linked to trauma. And I think as research shows too that trauma, significant trauma, also affects your genetics. It can change some of your body chemistry. And trauma does get passed down generations. So these are just some of the impacts I see today on from the Doctrine of Discovery. Another question posed was, what do we do today? How do we address this? And number one, I guess, is learning to respect each other. And today, I really appreciate the people participating and listening, and not only with your ears, but listening with your hearts. It's very hard to open your mind to hear words that might shake you to your foundation, your beliefs, your core. And Doctrine of Discovery definitely is one of the things that can shake you to your core. If the United States of America judicial and legal system were to actually open their ears and listen to their core, they'd know they were based on a lie. How do you correct that? On a personal, one-on-one basis, I think we address it with respect and love. And those are all Christian principles. So I think we just need to practice that. And not just Christian principles. I think there are other faiths, being respectful and open to approving and working and interacting with someone that has different beliefs, different faiths, maybe different values from you. That has to make a big start to correct the atrocities and the imbalances we see today, not only with Native Americans, but I think with all cultures, all races that we deal with. I don't know if I'm going over my 5 minutes. I didn't time myself. I guess I would want to mention one thing, that if you're interested, the PBS 2 years ago released a film called Lake of Betrayal. Myself and many Senecas are in that film. If you can find that, I know it's released on as a video or a DVD, and it at times in November comes up on the public broadcasting system. And it discusses quite a bit of information and history about the Seneca Nation and what happened to us in 1965. We lost 10,000 acres of land, and it was condemned for a construction of a dam, Kenzu Dam in Pennsylvania. So we were all removed from our homes, and the film discusses the impact of that. And again, that's I guess directly linked to what Doctrine of Discovery can do. It has the power today to disrupt my life, my children's life, to take our indigenous land that's never been taken. I live on land that has belonged to my people from time immemorial. That's a very strong land title. I don't know how many people on Mother Earth can say that they still live on the land that their ancestors lived on forever and ever, as far back before memory of man. So I think what was done to our people was a terrible, terrible act.
Okay.
I think that's kind of all I have to say.
Thank you, Susan, for this moving testimony that you have given us, that make us, think and meditate on all this situation. I'm going to ask Reverend Holly Hill Thompson, who will be the next panelist, and then then Tila Travis will be also presenting. Holly.
Okay, thank you, Carmen. Thank you, Suzanne, and thank you, Pat, and thank you, Carla. You have shared such important informations that the Presbyterian Church often has not ever heard. So they're hearing this for the first time. I would like to go through these very quickly. I will do talking not perhaps about each slide that you see, but I want to help communicate images to which we can refer later and in future events, because we will be having more and more discussions about how it is we are to be neighbors. And as a Shinnecock woman, when I pray Mikwanta Sheyean Kusukoyu. And just in reclaiming those words is a way of saying that our people had a relationship with the Creator and all of creation around us, and it was sacred and it was balanced. And I have depicted here Noah Donna and Massasoit, both male leaders, but in the middle is the image of a clan mother. And in matrilineal societies, it was the clan mother who chose or disposed of chiefs, if a chief was worthy or if a chief was unworthy. And that is a whole way of life that was completely disregarded by the settlers who came into a place where there was balance and harmony with nature and with the human beings. And they brought something that they thought was divine in and of itself. They thought that it was their responsibility, their duty, their gift to come and erase whatever it is they saw and did not understand, to supplant their own ways. A brand of Christianity that has no respect for human beings or for the earth, or for the varieties that the Creator has provided. And that is in every species, in different kinds of human beings, in different tribal nations, in different plants, in different, all over creation. And these ways are thousands of years old. And yet, the wisdom of women leadership has still not been fully appreciated by those who have come in the 15 and 1600s. This doctrine of discovery was, in a modern term, like a blank check. A blank check. Go to anywhere in the world, do whatever you wish to do to the people who happen to be there. For they are no more than, Chief Oren Lyon says, they are as a deer or a rabbit. Place that we lived in peace together, completely impacted and decimated by the brand of Christianity that was spawned from, which spawned the doctrine of discovery. I always show pictures of Gadali, Kateri Tekakwitha. We know that it is a pattern when colonizing and conquering nations tried to pick out one or two. Oh, this person will represent their race. I put this one on because this Native woman, she was finally canonized. And so there are people who are Native and who appreciate that. But please see that one of the reasons they say she came to the attention of the whites was because upon her death, her face turned white. And so they said that was a sign of her divinity. Samson Occam, of course, the first Native American ordained in East Hampton, just miles from Shinnecock territory, and in East Hampton Presbyterian Church. And his relationship with the denomination and with the whites did not grow and was a happy and productive one. He was resented because he took the side of justice of his native people and could communicate and had access to the Presbyterians and other white settlers who were taking his people's lands and cheating native people. and our ways of life were intergenerational and communal. Our ways of life had value and respect. And these two quotes, one, red jacket, telling a missionary, we'll wait and see if your Christianity has a good effect on the white people before we think of it ourselves. If it makes the white people more civilized, maybe we'll listen to what you have to say. And then, of course, our dear Katie Cannon, whose field was ethics, first African-American woman ordained in a Presbyterian church. She had come to the conclusion that the ethics of the dominator and the ethics of those dominated are not the same and cannot be reconciled. There is reasonably resistance to any sort of church participation when we find that it was not something that was concerned with our souls and with our peace and with our justice and with our faith, but it was concerned with taking our land and assimilating Native people, not recognizing that we had learned ways to live in peace together, that the biblical folk only talk about. I let this picture speak for itself. The Doctrine of Discovery was that blank check to bless and allow all of this violence to happen. And of course, we know that it continues in many ways, even though some of these things are no longer legal, they are still spawning behaviors and different kinds of ideologies based on a Christianity that is allowed to do what it will with indigenous people or non-white people. I always show this one because Shivington was the United Methodist who led the Sand Hill massacre in Colorado. Washington and Jackson, called great by white America, both of whom were called killers of Indians for valid reasons, the effects of which are still felt today. Before May of 2021, this 13-year silence about a moment of silence for Indigenous children in residential and boarding schools, similar to what Miss Suzanne just said of the Thomas Indian School, Hampton, and Carlisle Indian School. But then, of course, we found that there are at least 6,500 undocumented and sometimes unmarked burials. Reverend Sid Bird, Presbyterian minister, would tell his story of being taken from his home at 6 years old and the experience when he, finally returning to his grandparents, was unable to speak to them in his own language because of the experience of the boarding school. And these orange shirts, Orange Shirt Day, September 30th, is representing all of the children whose lives and whose childhood and whose future was taken from them through residential and boarding schools, which were church sponsored and government sponsored, committing cultural and spiritual and physical genocide. We will be learning much more about this because sadly the numbers are growing. I think the Doctrine of Discovery shows what Dr. John Dominic Crossan talks about, a genocidal germ in the kind of thinking that is fundamentalism, that thinks that if one group has the only and absolute truth, they can do whatever it is they please because they own that truth, and how dangerous that kind of Christianity is. I included this picture because this came during 2020, and one of our young people went down and enhanced the sign that is just feet from our reservation. It's in our face every day that the South Hemington has this wonderful history, and yet here we are. I reviewed just last night poverty standards for the Shinnecock community because the Poor People's Campaign asked me for the latest. And I became emotional just reading our statistics and how in the 1990s and early 2000s, our people were at 50% poverty level. Now it went to 60%, and now it's as high as 66% of the Shinnecock people are living at and below poverty. And this is in one of the wealthiest communities in the world, and that is the Hamptons. And yes, there are Presbyterians sitting on sacks of money and stolen land in the Hamptons. And that is why we want to have a conversation, because 1640 was 380 years ago, and the Indians are not going to disappear no matter how many denominations or governments or towns or villages wish that to be so. The land owns us. We belong to our land. We are related to our land. Our communities are caretakers of our land, and our DNA is in our land. And we will survive even through all of the traumas that come to us. We're learning more about missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls and Two-Spirits. Those are things we have to talk about. The orange shirt and the residential and boarding schools, things we have to talk about. The history of our meeting was to be peaceful. The two-row wampum is from 1613, and that was an agreement to live side by side in peace. And we know that the Dutch and other Europeans did not keep that. And there's still a chance. I'll go by her. She thought she was going to make a contribution to the Presbyterian Church. She's still waiting. But just lately, and Tila might touch on this, but 4.5 acres have finally been returned to the stewardship of the Shinnecock people. It was the top of Sugarloaf Hill, where ancient burials, no matter how the whites have tried since 1859 to remove us from that land, our burials and people are still found in that place. And we will fight against grave desecration, and we will fight for our 3,600 acres to be returned to us. Land back has begun in the Hamptons, no matter what else our neighbors think. And this is one of my chosen daughters, and she sees me doing all this writing and presenting everything having to do with the church and with non-native people. And she just said this to me: how can non-natives think this is all too horrible to even talk about when we have been living through this nightmare of trauma for generations? And so out of the mouths of babes. But I thank you for your attention, and I entrust these words now and our future conversations to your hearts and minds. Tabane.
Thank you, Holly, for this presentation. We're going to hear now from Tila Trosh, who will bring us some discussion about legal issues that are very important that we know about. Tila.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me, and thank you so much for being a part of this conversation. Not too many people are aware of what the Doctrine of Discovery is. I personally didn't learn about it until law school. I am a member of the Shinnecock Nation. I'm also an attorney. And I just want to talk a little bit about some of the legal fallacies and legal fictions that this country are built upon. So when you go to law school, every single student across the country, no matter what law school you go to, you have foundational law classes. You have property law, constitutional law, criminal law. And so property law, every single student starts out with a case called Pearson versus Post. And on its face, Pearson versus Post is a dispute over some colonists, some settlers in the town of Southampton who were hunting foxes. And one of the settlers had been pursuing this fox all day, had really been on the hunt, and another settler comes and kills the fox. So the dispute is, well, you know, whose kill is it? Who really killed this fox? But when you look deeper into the case, they talk about something that they're calling the wastelands. And the wastelands are all the beaches of the Hamptons, Southampton particularly, where my tribal nation, the Shinnecock Nation, is from. And we're a community surrounded by water. Our territory is surrounded by water on all sides, by the Atlantic Ocean, by the Shinnecock Bay, by the Peconic Bay. We've survived here 13,000 years from the bounty of the sea. And to the colonists, they just considered, you know, our beautiful oceans, our beaches, a wasteland. And so they don't even consider the fact that this fox belongs to Shinnecock, that this fox belongs to Mother Earth, that this fox isn't something that is owned by either of these settlers, these newcomers. And so you start to see from this case alone the fallacy that American case law, American property law is built on. And that case is from the early 1800s to 1803. And later, you start to see American jurisprudence start to create more legal fictions. And you see that a lot with Justice Marshall, who Anthony talked about a little bit earlier when we started this conversation. And so there's this really foundational trilogy of cases called the Marshall Trilogy. And that's really the start of constitutional law in this country. And again, it's based on legal fallacies, right? That the doctrine of discovery isn't just this obscure papal doctrine from the late 1400s anymore. It becomes the basis, the foundational lie of American constitutional law, that it's okay to take from indigenous people. And so you start to see things like manifest destiny and the expansion west, and tribes become crippled by this fallacy that is now a foundational part of the American institutional jurisprudence, okay? And so when tribes try to fight back, they can't. And it gets so bad that tribal nations in this country aren't even allowed from this time that you see the Marshall Trilogy in the 1820s, early 1820s, until the 1970s, the late 1970s. Tribal people could not bring any type of land claims in any type of federal court. And so you start to see the American Indian movement really, really fight back in the 1970s and win some of these fights that are just decades in the making. The 1800s is when we really start to see the boarding schools and it's a planned attack, a planned assimilation of our people. You heard a little bit about the Thomas Indian School. That was a school, it was separate from the federal boarding school systems. This was a school created by the Presbyterian Church, later taken over by the state of New York, but largely considered to be one of the cruelest and worst of all of the Indian boarding schools throughout the United States and Canada. Like, it was really bad, and it still to this day has a devastating effect on families, on children, on grandparents, on substance abuse. It completely eroded our community, our way of life, our language, our culture, and just our kinship and the way that we love and care for each other. And so it's something that we have to work every day on rebuilding. But this papal doctrine from the 1400s it's not just some obscure thing. It's something that has continued to harm us and continues to harm us to this day. But really building off the shoulders of of the giants of the American Indian movement in the 1970s who were so successful in getting us into the federal courts, getting us federal recognition. You heard from the other tribal group that they still continue to be not recognized federally. And I understand that because I'm 34 years old. Shinnecock Nation spent 32 years fighting the United States since the 1970s, when they created this administrative process called the federal acknowledgement process to become federally recognized. 32 years fighting the United States. We're impoverished. We can't even provide enough resources for our children, for our seniors. We don't have the resources to fight against the United States, almost an unlimited treasury, unlimited resources, and just a group that can, create legal fallacies out of anywhere. And so now I just want to bring us back to current day, because I could talk so much about the past, but I really want to bring this current. We have this movement now that's sweeping across the nation. It's the land back movement. And so we need the help of everybody on this call to, we need all denominations to denounce the doctrine of discovery, declare it the legal fiction that it is, and demand that it no longer be the foundational basis of American jurisprudence, so that we can move on. It's not okay to take from Indigenous people. This is the land that we sit on. It's where we are from. Our people have always been here, generation after generation after generation. And so we know how to steward the land. We know how to take care of the land. We've been doing it for tens of thousands of years. And now we're in a climate crisis. And we have a lot to teach about surviving for all of us together. The answers go back to the traditional ecological knowledge that we as Indigenous people, stewards of this land, are holding. And so that's exactly what the land back movement is just a recognizing of this fact. It's a simple fact. It makes sense. It's not complicated, and it's truthful. It's not, we're not based on any fallacies, no lies. We don't have to make anything up. It's just the truth. We know how to take care of our mother. We have been doing it again for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. And so we're so empowered now, my generation especially, to become attorneys, to become lawyers, to fight back in the judicial system, to fight against these ancient doctrines that, they don't make sense, they're wrong, they're unjust, and we're just barreling towards the path of justice. And it's not just for Indigenous people. Again, it's for all of us, for all of our benefit, and for all of our continued survival. It's really, that's what it's the elements that it comes down to. It's really fundamental. And so I hope that all of the speakers today and everything that we've learned about can really spark some engaging conversation on how we can move forward collectively to find a solution to just these hundreds and hundreds of years of injustice that have really bankrupted our country and our judicial system. Thank you.
Thank you, Tila. That, when you mentioned the manifest destiny, I just want to recall that how that was the drive that took the United States to go all the west and took all the lands, that went to war with Mexico and gained all that territory, and how even they promised to the Mexican that, we are going to respect your land and your property and your culture and your language. And that didn't happen. And then in 1898, they went out and conquered Puerto Rico, and we still are a colony. And so that shows the relationship from the beginning to today, on the 23rd day of October 2020. 2021, we're still facing this situation. So I, thank you very much to all the participants